Okay, hello guys. Oh, let me just move it a bit further away. Okay, hello guys. My name is Yuri. Today is 8th of August 2022, and today I'm making another video about the situation in Ukraine, even though I don't think I should be the one doing this. And I think that there's plenty of Ukrainian YouTubers that should really be doing this in English. They speak perfectly good English. They're pretty good at language and they are YouTubers. But no matter how hard I looked on YouTube, okay, maybe I have not spent hours and hours, but I did spend some time looking for YouTube channels where there would be Ukrainians actually talking about the situation in Ukraine. Okay, let me get my drink. Sorry, my throat went dry. And there is none. There's not many Ukrainian channels. What else? So I have found this channel by people actually. These guys like that talk. These guys, this channel, what they do is they uh, dub in English the conversations which are being had by mostly one Ukrainian expert, which is Alexei Arestovich. He's like military expert in Ukraine. He's in an advisory to one of the president aides. So he does it out of he's not getting paid for this. He's literally being like there to help whichever way he can. He's a famous Ukrainian YouTuber, and he was one of the people who analyzed military and economics way before the war has begun. So the channel name is Privateer Station. I'm sorry, I'm like not talking into the mic. My bad. The channel name is Privateer Station. Look it up on YouTube. I'll put a link to that in the description. But other than that, I haven't really found many places where Ukrainians would actually speak about the situation in Ukraine in depth, like and say, hey, this is what's going on, this is the situation, this is the history. I did a couple of videos at the start of this conflict, of this war. It's not a conflict, it's a war. And I talked about the history. I talked about what was happening. I did say that Ukraine was going to win this war. Unfortunately, I also said that look, if the West doesn't help, it will take long. If the West helps, it will save a lot more lives. And as we can see now, that's what's happening. But I usually do YouTube videos for purpose of like, okay, I talk about something, I talk about this, I talk about that, and when I end up having a Facebook conversation, something like this, I just go like, look, guys, I talked about this here, here's a video. You can listen to this and give me your arguments back. If you cannot, then okay, conversation's finished. If you're willing to spend 2 hours writing out hundreds of comments versus just watching a video and replying to that, then there's no reason to actually continue this one. So okay, we'll go back to this map. The reason I decided to do this video is again not something because people quite often from Ukraine, because I'm not living there at the moment. I have moved out of Ukraine many years ago. So I had some backlash from a couple of people saying, "Hey, you're not living in Ukraine. You haven't lived here for years. Do you really think you know what's going on?" It's like to an extent, right? But also I use the sources that come from Ukraine. Obviously, continue keeping track of things, but same as I do, for example, for like when I lived in England for nearly 20 years, I'm still kind of connected to the areas where I live. But again, I came across a Russian troll on LinkedIn, Obviously, the LinkedIn didn't really like me calling the guy a troll and telling him to go take a hike. But the guy keeps on posting some BS, and I found this is like, wait a minute, the BS needs to be addressed, and there's also people in the Western Hemisphere, like in English-speaking world, which Russians would call useful fools. And I understood that people don't actually get the information. They will get this troll who apparently has access to this Russian channel, which is like tells you all the truth about the Ukrainians and about the situation in Ukraine. And when you ask them, look, guys, what's the channel? Give me your sources. I'm happy to check them out. I'm happy to look at them, right? They never give anything to you, right? So there's lots of people who will be going like, yeah, I have this, like you guys listening to this Western media and they just lie to you. It's like, okay, I'm not a Western media. I'm a bit of a bastard, very much like them, but I'm not the media. And I was like, hey, I want to do this one covering the situation in Ukraine, what's happened over the last few months, and also like to reply some stuff. Like, for example, the situation with the prisoners of war camp being blown up, right? Which is the Russians say, oh, Ukrainians have shot in a missile exactly into the prisoners, but none of the guards died, nobody else died, just the prisoners. And Ukrainians are doing this to kill off their own soldiers, so that the Ukrainian soldiers did not tell the world about how Ukrainians are committing war crimes against other Ukrainians. And you go like, okay, so the Russians have invaded Ukraine in 2014. Right, since that time, people who remained in the Ukrainian side, the Russian-speaking people, never suffered. As a matter of fact, there's like nearly 90% support all over Ukraine of the actions of Ukrainian president to defend Ukraine. And I'll tell you, probably another 9% are his political adversaries who support their political adversaries, who would want him to act even harder. Would be like, yeah, fucking bomb the shit out of them. They want to be, so there will be like less than 1% of Ukrainians that live in Ukrainian territory that will say, yeah, like we happy to make peace with Russia on whichever conditions. But is it? So the Russian-speaking Ukrainians, which make up over 40% of the population, but to be honest, in Ukraine, nearly 100% of the population is fluent in Russian, right? But the 40%, nearly 40% of the population who are not fluent in any other language except Russian, right? Most of them want to kick the Russian butt. They want orcs out of Ukraine. Why is that? Well, because the cities they live in have been bombed, shelled for months. Right? They've been under the threat of Russian invasion since 2014. As a matter of fact, recently there was a news story. Let's look it up, right? Explosion in Russian fleet Crimean headquarters. Yep, the drone explosion hit Russian fleet Black Sea Russian fleet headquarters in Crimea. So essentially, there are people in Crimea who has been under occupation for 8 years who set off a drone which took an explosive to Russian fleet headquarters and blew a living fucking shit out of them. right? There are people who are still fighting to return to Ukraine in Donetsk, in Lugansk, and that's despite the fact that there's been plenty of proof of Russian torture and capturing the people who are pro-Ukrainian, torturing them, or people disappearing completely. From 2014, there was a number of cases. There was a mass graves found in some cities which Ukrainians managed to free from Russians in 2014. All right. And let's just look it up. So again, you can look at this one. Explosion in Russian fleet Crimean headquarters. You can look it up on YouTube and you'll find articles. So I'm not going to go through all the articles, but just to go. Okay. So what I'm typing here is mass graves found in the towns which are freed from Russian invasion in Ukraine, right? Yeah. And the total search is mass graves found in Ukrainian towns freed from Russian forces. So right, this is in Kiev. This is the modern ones in 2014. Okay, sorry, it just doesn't include 2014 at the moment because it's a long search, but you can it's still like searchable on Google and you can find those things. And they were found the people who killed, some pro-Ukrainian people who were kidnapped in 2014 till today. In Kherson, in my home city, right, so okay, torture and disappearance of people in occupied south of Ukraine. And look, guys, a lot of that doesn't just happen because of the Russian troops. The Russian troops are doing this, but also because people who they instill in the control of the city are essentially criminals. So they're trying to get as much as they can. So there is like something they like, a business they like, or they want somebody to give them something, they essentially use the criminal tactics. And they'll do this also with the blessing of the Russian government because their purpose is to scare people into being afraid. And yet, there's been a few high level assassinations and attempts in Kherson by resistance movements. So some guy was shot, one of the leaders was poisoned. So, and this has just recently happened. So again, can be found on the internet, can be found discussed in the Ukrainian forums, but is not really kind of part of the conversation in the West because obviously the Western journalists are not covering that side. They kind of very generic view, very little understanding of the situation on the ground. And as I say, needs a proper Ukrainian bloggers to actually go in and give people the details because there's a tons of Russian trolls which throw lots of stuff out there. And to be honest, I think it's fair to think that many people who are again, not as that deep in the conversation, like know about Ukraine, but will not know the inner workings of the country, they will not be able to pick a good side or bad side, right? They will just go like, hey, the general media has been caught lying so much, we don't know who want to believe them. So if somebody comes over with half decent English and a half decent argument, they go like, oh, we probably could listen to this one because he never lied to us before. Right? It requires more Ukrainians to be talking about this. And to be honest, I have to say that a couple of years back, I did criticize Ukrainians on the same subject. We're very good at talking things out through over between ourselves, but Ukrainians are not very good at defending their corner, especially when it comes to doing this to a big amount of people. Just an example, we still hear, it's still part of Russian propaganda that people who in Ukraine who like Bandera, they're Nazis because Bandera was a Nazi. And to be honest, I don't see a lot of defense of that particular point from Ukrainians. They go like, well, maybe he was like fighting for independence of Ukraine, he's like, so, and simple answer is whoever says that Bandera was a Nazi is talking fucking shit and he's a liar. Right? That's it. That's all there is an answer. There is no other answer to that particular point. Why? Because Bandera did fight for Ukrainian independence and he was part of the movement which has actually been partially working with Germans when they were just coming in, especially when Hitler just came into power, but over time has separated. The movement itself has actually separated, but to be honest, as soon as the Germans came into Ukraine and showed their face, they did hope that the Ukrainians did hope that, hey, if Germans kick out Russians, we can have our independent Ukraine. But very soon they understood it wasn't, right? It was in the first day. So by the decree of the Nuremberg Tribunal, right? So this is a Nuremberg Tribunal decision. Again, can be looked up on the internet. All the documents are there. I think it's volume 17 of Nuremberg decisions. I don't know, because there's like 20 volumes or something like this. And in that decision, the Bandera and his people were considered a third party in the World War II, which had fought against both Soviet Union and Nazi Germany. Okay? As an organizer of this movement, Bandera has spent years in German concentration camps. As a matter of fact, he was captured pretty much at the start of the war, and he spent most of the war in the concentration camps. 2 of his brothers have died in German Nazi concentration camps, right? He was not a friend of Nazis. But the Russians will still peddle this bullshit, and Ukrainians kind of very, very, very timid at telling people to go fuck themselves when they have to, right? Unfortunately, that's a fact about Ukrainians. We don't like getting into fights. We're chill, We can fight, just don't like getting into those. And people don't do this, but it needs to be said. It needs to be put out there because the Russians and their trolls are very aggressive in this kind of stuff. And people don't hear that Ukrainian side of the story. But today I also want to go over the military side of things, right? Obviously we talked why I took a long time, and this is why I don't think I should be the one doing these videos, simply because it's not something I prepare, it's something I just say what I feel, right? These are not videos to be a YouTuber that pleases lots of people. Okay, let's go back to the military side. So we can still hear, like, when the war began, I've made a very long video where I was talking about how Ukraine has actually won the war, Russians have lost, and the West is losing. And to be honest, the West is still losing. Right? And today in this video, I'm just gonna talk about the military situation. I will make a couple more videos that will talk about other stuff within this war, which will not involve this as much. But I don't want to make this video into like a 4-hour thing where I cover everything, right? So let's explain the situation, the military situation, because there's a lot of people who will go like, oh yeah, Ukraine has lost, blah blah blah, West should stop helping Ukraine. I think it was a British politician, for example, Jeremy Corbyn, who said like, if we give more weapons to Ukraine, the war is gonna continue, right? It's like, we should not give weapons to Ukraine so that Russians can just capture them. Yeah, that's gonna go through good. All right, an idiot. Okay. But who can help him? The guy's like, 90 years old. He's gone senile already, like. But when the war just started, the Russians, when I was making the video, the Russians still did not have that line here. They've invaded from the south, they've captured this much, and since then they did, in the first couple of weeks, they've kind of got this line here. At the start of the war, they also had managed to gain, like, at start they've managed to gain the territories. These ones that are covered in dark light blue, this is the territories which Russians have actually captured, but then they've been pushed back. So before any real Western help, the Russians already had their asses kicked. They did have more, like, armament, they did have more shells, like they had more cannons, but they still had their asses kicked, and they had to retreat from all those areas. Here we also remember, some people might remember the stories where the Russian troops have decided to dig trenches in the most nuclear polluted area in the world. I think there's very few areas we should have less nuclear pollution, but yeah, one of them here, they've actually dug trenches in that area, like thousands and thousands and thousands of Russian troops went through digging trenches there and traveling through that area. I actually made a comment, I'm surprised they're not glowing in the dark. But yeah, they did, but they still got pushed back. They had to retreat because there's like foresty area. People who know it, like they can come close to Russian troops and essentially shoot them up while being unpunished for that. So the Russians ran up from here. They've lost thousands of, like, 1,000 mechanical units. So we're talking cars, thousands of vehicles, like cars, trucks, 4x4s, tanks, the armored personnel carriers around here, and in those areas as well. They've been pushed back, and very much like it seemed like before the war, when I was making the video, I pointed the part where I said that, look, the main two strikes are gonna come down from the south, from Crimea, aiming to here, so this corridor, and then there will be lots of strikes from other directions, just to pull the Ukrainian forces to different sides. So that's what they've done. They've lost those strikes there. So far since then, they had a regional high success in this area, and the reason they've done this, again, there's lots of roads coming in here, as including the railways, so they could move the troops there very fast once they broke through the original defense lines. And also they didn't care how many people died, essentially. So since the war had started, the confirmed death rate is about 40,000, but also Russian commanders say that they have more than 40,000 missing in action. So Ukrainians say that unconfirmed numbers of Russian deaths are about 60, 70,000. So there's a number of people dead, but also like confirmed 40,000, but they say more people lost, not even through death, but through injury. So there's more and more pictures appearing in the Russian internet of the soldiers which have got no arms, no legs, sometimes both, right? So a lot of those guys as well came out of there. So the losses are not just in death, but also in injury. And the kind of injuries which are not, which cannot be healed. Ukrainian losses are much less because Ukrainians are actually targets. The Ukrainian strategy is to try to keep the troops in as safe as possible. So hence the original successes of Russians, because they didn't care how many soldiers they lose. But also Ukraine, like for example, in the south, Ukrainians have allowed the Russians, once they captured Kherson, Ukrainians have fall back and they allowed Russians to go up these roads and act there, and then they simply just picked them off. So thousands of people dead or injured in that area alone, simply because Russians were like trying to attack and capture Mykolaiv, but they failed. Russians continue shelling Mykolaiv and Kharkiv most of all. These are two major cities being shelled, but they also continue doing missile strikes on other places. And they're doing this like very much like I said in my original video to make sure that Ukrainian anti-air defense systems are scattered all over Ukraine and allow Russian planes to do at least something on the front. Because if Ukrainian anti-air defense could be concentrated in those areas, the Russian airplanes would be completely fucked. And Russians have lost dozens of airplanes already anyway. Airplanes and helicopters, not just through the big anti-aircraft defense, but also like Ukrainians have used the anti-tank missile Stugna, had been used to knock down helicopters, and to the point where it went from something which was like, okay, it might just happen if it just happens, like to the point where people knowingly set those up, and they managed to down like 2-3 helicopters a day from one of those launch pads. Because the way it's been led is not by lighting up the target with the laser, but it's the videos is directed on the target, but the laser is used to lead. It's actually aimed at the back of the missile, so the anti-laser, whatever defense others weapons might have, doesn't really work as well, because the missile is being directed by the laser beam, which hits the receiver at the back end and transfers the information where the rocket has to go. It has its pluses, it has its minuses, obviously. It's not perfect, but it works. So it became actually kind of one of the things which Ukrainian defense enterprises can actually supply to the war. But the Russians are losing lots of airplanes, so they continue bombing the cities just to ensure that the Ukrainian air defense is actually spread out. Right, there's been cases where they shot shopping centers, they've shot like normal housing where there's no military there. They do it on purpose to essentially do damage to civilians. And same way they have done in Chechnya, same way they've done in Georgia when they bombed the living shit out of Tbilisi, same way they've done in Syria when they completely bombed the living shit out of Aleppo just because they didn't want to give up to Russians. And Assad, was it? Yeah, basically they absolutely annihilated the city, including the use of chemical weapons. But since that Ukraine is a bit too close to Europe, I don't think Russians will use chemical weapons, at least not just yet. Right, I think the also last case was when the Russians have bombed a port in Odessa just after they, literally hours after they signed up a treaty which would allow people to export grain through this port. They bombed an port infrastructure to make sure this doesn't happen. Right, so there is so many people who will say that Russia is winning. So after Russians have lost a lot of area in the north and bit of northeast, the map didn't change much in the last about 5 months. So since the end of March, the area they have managed to gain control of is around there. So that area is about, it's equal to the motion of about, I don't know, few kilometers in 5 months. That's it. That's all they managed to gain in the last few months. And they left, let's say, tens of thousands of their troops have actually died there. They also trying to be very kind of aggressive in a number of directions. Recently, they have moved again tens of thousands of their troops to the south of Ukraine, to Kherson. That's because Ukrainians have managed to cross one of the smaller rivers here, so they started to gain foothold for the attack from here. But also Ukrainians have openly said, look, we want the south free as soon as possible. But what Ukrainians did is they blew up one of the major bridges. So the major bridge near Antonivka has been blown up. It wasn't completely blown up, but there's no possible ways of moving across it. The missile strikes also just last night have actually destroyed all the equipment that Russians have brought in to fix not all, but a lot of equipment that Russians have brought to the bridge to fix the bridge was left on the bridge. I wonder why. Ukrainian missiles have hit the equipment, completely destroyed it. So there is also Russians also hold there's only a few spots where the Russians can hold the equipment, all the vehicles and stuff like this, where they can collect their troops, and those places have been reachable by Ukrainian artillery fire since the start of the war. So there's a place called Chernobyevka. Some people might have heard about it, but in the last few months there was like 30 plus strikes. So whenever the Russian troops would congregate there was like 30 more strikes on there already. They already stopped counting. Lots of troops, lots of equipment, helicopters. There used to be an airport, an airfield near that village, but I think by now they can't really land anything there because it's just been blown to shreds. Now with the appearance of the new Western technology on there, like HIMARS, which is long range artillery. Then they have the the parts where the drones which can be shot out of a cannon, and loitering drones which can loiter for like 2-3 hours, not super high speed, but they're very small, nearly impossible to notice by anti-air defense, so they can reach longer distances as well. Also, sorry. Also, with the appearance of the new, like, because Ukrainians have had anti-aircraft guns, but the more anti-aircraft weapons are coming in from the west, and more long-range anti-ship missiles are coming in, because Ukrainians haven't had anti-ship missiles. They were the ones that were used to destroy some of the ships in the Black Sea, including the flag carrier, the fleet flag carrier, the Moskva thing that sunk. That's been done with Ukrainian weapons, right? So a lot of stuff which was done was still done with Ukrainian weapons, but now more and more Western weapons come in, and this allows Ukrainians to reach further, or to have more freedom in reaching further. The most influential was HIMARS. Why was it so? Well, number one, because it's actually reaches longer than the normal artillery. Number two, is a precision weapon. It can hit the certain area. It doesn't need to have hundreds of missiles shot in the air to reach that area and hopefully hit the target. Because that was Russian artillery, was what they were doing. They were saying, like, look, the target is some way. If you not come into like missiles which are shot at the cities, the precision missiles which, you know, miss their targets by half a city, the Russian battlefield artillery is not really kind of aimed at being precise. One of the reasons they were losing is they would come in and they would say, look, this is the square 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer. The target is somewhere there. Try and hit it. And what they would do is they shoot hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of shells to hit the target, and quite often miss. Ukrainian artillery was a bit more precise. They had years and years and years to actually train in this area. And not only the fact that Ukrainian artillery was training, but Ukrainians have developed new tank tactics. So essentially they use tank as a small caliber artillery. So if the big artillery would be 150 millimeters, the tank cannon is 120 millimeters. But if you know how to use it, you can actually reach very good results. And Ukrainians have trained this over the years in the war with Donbass, where the Russians did not. So the way they use tanks would be direct impact, whereas Ukrainians would just put a tank behind the hill, and then there would be somebody saying, okay, the target is there and there and there, and then they would use a tank as an artillery piece, and then put 2-3 shots and then move. So by the time the Russian artillery replies, because they think it's a normal artillery unit there, the tanks are already buggered off. And doing this, Ukrainians have reached some really good results in destroying the Russian armament, Russian positions, and Russian equipment, and also Russian like shells and stuff like this that they bring close enough to the front. What HIMARS allows to do is that it allows to hit the targets further inside. Somebody's doing stuff. And instead of having to spend like 20 shells, it's only one missile. And what Ukrainians have started to do is they started to hit Russian depots. Not even the Russian like military command, they do this as well whenever they can. But one thing they can find and hit is the storage unit, the storages of Russian shells, rockets, whatever needs to be used by Russian troops to hit Ukrainians is now reachable by HIMARS. It started from like 50 plus kilometers. Now I think they can go all the way up to 100 kilometers. And according to some Ukrainian sources, even Americans were like, we never thought about using HIMARS like this. Like, simply instead of like, because it was designed to hit like an artillery unit or something like this. And Ukrainians were like, well, what's the point of spending an entire rocket on an artillery unit, which is like, or anti-aircraft unit? What we do is we hit the depot, which holds all the parts and all the stuff they need for this unit, and just blow that shit up. And now all of a sudden, one rocket has done more damage than and stopped like 10 artillery units or 100 artillery units from actively engaging, because they don't have anything to engage with. So this was the kind of approach to HIMARS, and now with the fact that Americans already agreed to supply Ukraine with the rockets which can hit as far as like 300 kilometers, as well as having new anti-aircraft weapons which also can hit quite far, same as Ukrainian ones, and also as well as having new anti-airship rockets. That really opens up new opportunities to Ukraine, right? So at this point of time, so we see that, look, Russians have got to here. So this was their success in the last 5 months. But the Ukrainian military approach, as like I said, is to try and keep as many troops alive as possible. So it's not about just blindly fighting like on every corner. It was about like their target is to destroy as much Russian troops with as little losses as they possibly can, and they're still managing to fend off most of attacks. And what Ukrainians did here as well is they made this line a bit straighter. So there was like a dip which they had to defend. Now it's not there anymore. So it means they have to defend a lot smaller area. But it also means that Russians have to bring in their supplies closer, and Ukrainians can hit them better. But Russians have to continue attacking aggressively all the time, because as soon as they stop, it gives Ukrainians a chance to collect their troops in one spot and to attack. Now, as we can see, this dark red line here, this one, now that was where the Russians originally invaded and the territory they managed to keep since 2014. And as we can see in the east, there's still a lot of it which they couldn't bridge. Why? Because, like I said, here a lot of success they had was because there was a lot of roads, some railways where they could move in quickly, and there were not many prepared positions there. There were some, obviously, but this area is just too vast, and they managed to kind of come around. But what happened is Ukrainian troops also managed to evade the capture, to evade an encirclement and kept most of them intact. So now they're holding them back. But Russians need to continue attacking on different directions just so that Ukrainian troops do not have opportunities to amass themselves, but also under continuous threat of them breaking the front and maybe doing something inside. What happened over the last few months was that more and more Ukrainian troops have been trained. And more Ukrainian troops, for example, I know that British army military has agreed to train like something like 10 troops every month or so, which would be trained by NATO standards, 10,000 troops. So there's more and more troops coming in different areas, and which allows Ukrainians to swap their troops out, give them some rest. Obviously, it's not all plain sailing, as we can see. There's a lot of fighting going on, but more and more Ukrainian troops coming in. But the thing we have was different between Ukraine and Russia is that Ukraine is getting newer weaponry from the West, not just the West like US or UK. Like the West is finally coming down to a decision like, hey, we need to give Ukrainians actually proper weapons. Took them months, right? But they got there, which means that over time Ukrainian army is refreshing itself. Whereas Russians they had big stockpiles of weapons, but now with weapons like HIMARS, with weapons like drones which can float in the air, I forgot how they call them, right? Ukrainians can hit the storage depots which are within a certain area of the front line, which means that they're making very hard for Russians to deliver that stuff to deliver equipment to the front lines, to their soldiers which are fighting here, right? But it also means that a lot of that is being wasted, blown up, just goes into the air by simply like a small drone landing there. And Russians are starting to run out of ammunition, of equipment. I think let's just look. Russian T-62. So there's some images, so you can look up on Google and Russian T-62 tanks in Ukraine. So this is an image. This is an old T-62 from all the way from 1962. It's still obviously got a cannon. It can still do some damage, but has not been properly upgraded or anything else for the modern warfare. They just literally fixed it up just so it can run and put it in different directions in Ukraine. So where there is, if they don't see the direction as high a threat or as vital to the actions, they're already putting those tanks on there. Those tanks, they don't have the modern equipment. So while Ukraine is got like I think 100 tanks from Poland, which were Tverdy, which is an upgraded T-72, as far as I remember, with modern aiming equipment, with GPS, with like night sights, with proper active armor, which is like used to, if something hits the tank, it just blows up and blows that thing away. Look up active tank armor. I think it will explain better than I can. But if Ukraine gets this, right, that's what Russians get. That's what Russians get. So they're losing their equipment, their best equipment. Like they've lost over 1,000 tanks already, I think. Personnel, few thousand personnel carriers, more modern ones. So there's still a lot of the stuff they can throw, but it's like stuff which has been in storage for years and years and years and years, which was never upgraded, which was never fixed up. They just got to give it to the tank, to their soldiers and say, hey, use this. The stories from the front, which come with the new soldiers they've just hired, so they not actively conscripting people, but what they're doing is they go into the areas of Russia which are very poor, and they say to the people, to the men there, the ones that are still left, hey, we're gonna pay you an equivalent to so much, to like a yearly wage a month to go, and if you survive in Ukraine for 3 months, you're kind of set for the next few years, right? And those guys generally don't survive very well because they don't get very good equipment. And this is what many people get wrong when they're talking about the endless kind of human possibility of Russians to send people, as many people as they want to Ukraine, it's not the problem they don't have the people. They can find some drunks, like pick them up and say, hey, you're going to Ukraine. The problem is they're running out of weapons they can give to those guys. Like, they're also running out of professional military. So, for example, people who can actually drive tanks. They're running out of people who can shoot more than artillery, right? Many shells they would use in their artillery are like 20 years old, 30 years old, and there is so long where that you can keep those shells and you can shoot them, but many of them go to the point where they can't shoot because something went wrong in them, because you can store them for so long with certain conditions, but obviously they're more fragile and they have lots of chemicals inside, and those chemicals just kind of slowly react with other chemicals and then they become unusable. So they already facing that problem. They're running out of missiles they can shoot, so a lot of missiles they use, again, they're Soviet era missiles. They're not very precise. They're good for terrorism. They're good if you want to just blow things up just because, but they're not very good at actually hitting military targets. Like we talked before, there's a cases where military they have to very cruel in military camps. So against Ukrainians they have captured. Again, this is driven by the fact that a lot of their people die and they get in there and they're essentially trying to scare people into submission. Right? The stories that come from the Russian military camps are not very good ones. But then, the stories that came out of Russian jails where they've been raping prisoners with sticks and stuff like this were never good ones either. So same people got given a power where they think they will never be questioned. But with new weapons, I say, while Russia is losing weapons, Ukraine is gaining new weapons. And it's not just about the lengths how far these weapons can shoot. But many of those weapons can work together in a tandem with something else and something else, which means that they can hit targets, they can react to things faster, and they can move around faster. And now we're getting to the situation in Ukraine. So everybody's talking about the freeing of Kherson, my home city where I was born, right? And people go, oh, how Ukraine's going to do it now that Russians have sent a lot of troops in there. The problem that Russians have is there were three bridges. One was a railway bridge, and I think it's been damaged to the point where they can't actually use rail anymore. So they put like blocks over it and they run cars over it. There was obviously the bridge in Antonivka. That has been damaged beyond being useful, and there is a bridge up here in Kakhovka, right? So this means that they have a lot of bottlenecks which they can to transport the equipment to this side of the river, right? And this was the biggest bridge. So it was 4 lanes, so 2 lanes one way, 2 lanes the other way. And this is non-usable now. So they are reliant on the railway bridge. I think it's two-way rail. It's been a while since I've seen it. It's a two-way rail, and it means that so the cars can go in two directions, right? But it's still not as big as this one. In Novakhovka, it's the bridge. It can't really be destroyed. It's a very solid thing which sits on top of the parts which hold the water. So it's kind of very solid stuff. Very much harder to destroy. But it's an old bridge. it's essentially, as far as I remember, this is 2 lanes. I'm not gonna look it up on Google. People can look it up on Google, but as far as I remember, it's 2 lanes. Last time I've been there, it was a long time ago. It's 2 lanes, which means that the amount of equipment they can send through there is limited. But it also means that these are the bottlenecks where the troops gather before they can cross or get off, which means that those are easy targets for artillery like HIMARS or one of those drones which can hold in the air, and just suicide drones, which can loitering suicide drones. Yeah, they loiter, they come in, they blow something up, right? So basically they have 3 bottlenecks. The Russians have dropped a pontoon bridge and the water crossing near here. But to be honest, again, this is not something which can let through lots of people through or backs. So which means that, again, bottlenecks which can be targeted by Ukrainian military. And we remember I said already before that Ukrainians target is not to really kind of get involved there. It's to keep as much of their troops alive and safe while having a point kind of targets that they can hit. The other difference between Ukrainians and Russians is that Ukrainians do not really want to get themselves involved in a city fighting. Essentially, they're trying to create situations where Russians are gonna go like, okay, we've got nothing to fight with, we give up. Unlike Russians, you can look up the pictures of let's look it up. Mariupol today. Right? You can look it up, Mariupol today. This is the result of Russians trying to take cities. It's always been that result. They cannot take the city. They don't have the skills. They don't have the equipment. Okay, they don't have the knowledge. And they don't have the desire. They just bomb everything to the ground. That's their way of taking cities. Right? Kherson has got a population of over 400,000 people, so it's not a super big city, but it's still 400,000 people. Kakhovka, again, quite Nova Kakhovka. Again, it's a pretty big place. Old Kakhovka, again, not a small place, not hundreds of thousands, but over 100,000 people each, I think. So the last thing Ukrainian troops want is to go and have to fight in the city where there's lots of civilians. So the Ukrainian targets are going to be very different. It's going to be to surround the cities and force the surrender. But to be honest, and this is my personal opinion, because I don't know how the troops are moving on the Ukrainian side. Obviously, we see reports of where the Russian troops are, because they say, oh, we're going to go and capture Odessa again. They tried, they failed. They got to Mykolaiv and they failed miserably, and now they sending rockets into the city as a punishment for Russian-speaking people, the Russian people who don't want to join Russia. So that's their way of leading war. But I don't think that Ukrainians are going to be like, hey, let's go and just driving through there. As a matter of fact, I think that Russians are kind of in a weird situation, because obviously there's fighting with them trying to threaten Zaporizhia near the nuclear plant, which they had a fight in. And there's lots of fighting here. So there's like this seems like the biggest area where they're most active. But lots of troops have been moved out of that area, moved to the south. And there are troops here which are trying to kind of act as if they're attacking here. And they are in a kind of situation where Ukrainians can attack here, but again, this is going to be lots of soldiers killed, which is for essentially smaller towns and villages. But I strongly suspect that one they're most afraid of, right? This is why they're trying to be so threatening in other directions, and one the Ukrainians can get is this kind of area. Why? Well, there's a number of roads, main roads, which Ukrainians can use to attack here. And if they can free that area, so Zaporizhia to Melitopol and Myrne, towards Berdansk and Polohe, this kind of area, what gives to Ukrainian is it just gives too many advantages to Ukrainians with the again looking at the weapons which Ukrainians have now long range weapons. Getting this area puts Russians in a very bad place. So from here it's only a couple of 100 kilometers to the Crimean Bridge. So the new HIMARS rockets that they said Ukraine is going to receive will reach the bridge, and this is one of the main bottlenecks for moving troops across Crimea and into the south, if there is one. Capturing this territory also means that Russians cannot move their troops across the mainland of Ukraine. Right, they're very afraid of this because obviously if you have to move your troops from here to here, the best way is to move them through here. But if you can't move them through there, even if they kind of Ukrainians get to this area between the roads, where the normal artillery can easily reach the main roads down here, already makes near impossible for Russians to move their troops. And remember, the Russians are not really holding a lot of this area. They kind of have the lines which they have their troops, but in some villages they probably haven't seen Russians for weeks. But they don't really like them there anyway. So if Ukrainians capture this territory, it gives them a number of advantages, which Russians are kind of afraid of. With the more modern, say, and anti-aircraft defense in here, they can control a lot of airfields in the east of Crimea. Ukrainians can do the same from this area, which means that flying airplane sorties to this side of the Ukraine becomes next to impossible for Russian airplanes, right? But also anti-ship weapons, so anti-ship missiles, can reach across the whole of Azov Sea. So Russians were seen like using the port of Mariupol to travel, to move some troops and equipment, but also to take things out of Ukraine. So they'd send their troops in there. There's a couple of other smaller ports places they could drop their troops. But if the anti-ship weapons are moved down here, it essentially excludes Russian fleet from Azov Sea. So despite them claiming, oh look, the sea is ours, well, they cannot do it. the Ukrainian commentator, the Arestovich, the one I talked about in the beginning of the video, he said that Ukrainian forces, the Ukrainian ship, Ukrainian fleet was the only fleet that has managed to kill an enemy fleet flag carrier without ever leaving a fucking port, by simply having those weapons that can reach that far. As a matter of fact, a lot of Russian ships have been moved from Sevastopol port to, I think, Novorossiysk here, because Ukrainian anti-ship missiles can just about reach that area, right? Not completely, but they can. So now the capturing this area is actually very good for Ukrainians, because they can have more control over the airplanes that are flying over this area, but also have more control over the shipping lanes, stopping Russians from being able to steal shit from Ukraine. Also, we see that having HIMARS in here with the new rockets also allows them to not just reach the bridge, but also reach the bottlenecks on the bridge. So the troops that are traveling, they'll be gathering some way here or here, right? Those places become available. But also there are bottlenecks for the roads here and here, which some of them can be reached by longer reach artillery units like missiles that are being hopefully supplied to Ukraine right now. So, and Russians are in this position, so it puts Russians in this swung position as well, so that Ukrainians from here can attack this way or this way, right? But actually, at the moment, Russians are also, swung is essentially chess position where, like, you put somewhere and it goes like, well, you can move this part or this part, and you still, and I can attack in both directions, right? So I put my figure my chess piece somewhere, and it attacks all of a sudden in two directions, and one of the directions you have to save, and one of the directions you have to give up. And at the moment, Russians are also in a swung position, because holding this area is key area for them, because if they lose this, there will be a very heavy strike to the morale of their troops, right? Because the question will be like, what are we fighting for? We had our asses kicked on the north of Ukraine, but they said to us, look, we're gonna get this. And by losing the only major city that they have managed to capture, and I've said it before, it was like either pure damn fucking luck, or somebody was very, very fucking good who has done it, but they screwed Russians on that one. Or it was both, but it was the worst luck for Russians ever. Moving to the right bank of the Dnieper River, it was not a good decision. It was a bad decision. They had to hold their lines along the river. That would make it very, very hard for Ukrainians to actually attack. And they had to reinforce that part, but they failed to do so. So now they're kind of in a position where Ukrainian troops can attack there, and Russians have to keep that kind of protected or run away. But if they can put too many troops down here, they make themselves open here. And if they move themselves so many troops that they can defend this area, they leave themselves open in lots of other areas. They don't have the troops. They never had the military troops, which, as I said before, is 150,000 to try and capture Ukraine. It's laughable, right? They needed to have at least 1 million of prepared troops. They didn't. They still don't, right? They have the troops which they can use against civil unrest, They call it National Guard, but those are essentially like bad police officers with sticks. That's all they are. They can shoot at unarmed civilians. They'll be happy to do that, all right, even their own civilians, but they cannot really fight in the war. They also lost in this last few months. They've lost all their well prepared troops. Not all, but a lot of them. And many of those troops, because they don't call it a war, because they call it a special operation, it also leads to the fact that many professional military men, especially the ones who have been in Ukraine, they get back and they essentially hand in their notice. They say, sorry guys, I'm out, I'm retiring, I'm whatever, but I ain't going back there. So their losses are not only on the side of people killed, but they're also on the side of people who have left their troops. Which means that the new set of people, they're not professionals. Some of them might have served in the army some time ago, but they don't have the equipment as well. So they get the numbers. I think they've managed to just about to get the numbers back up, but they don't have the skills and they don't have the numbers to defend all this territory. Essentially, they're in a position where wherever threat is created by Ukrainian troops, like a threat here, Ukrainians can easily move their troops a lot faster to this area, and with equipment like I say, HIMARS, like drones which can loitering drones, kamikaze drones which can go on for hours and then hit the target. Ukrainian forces getting more and more mobile in the areas they can hit, and they're hitting not the troops but the depots, which means that if Ukrainians start to attack against the orcs, yeah, that's what the Ukrainians call Russians. If the Ukrainians attack against the orcs simply will not have the equipment to fight back with. So maybe for an initial half an hour firefight, but then they're done. They don't have the shells and their cannons. Well, yeah, you can have a cannon, but if you don't have anything to shoot with, your cannon is useless. And Ukrainians have been reaching that point, or where the equipment is kept so far from the fighting. So if HIMARS can get on like 60 kilometers right behind enemy lines, so it means you have to keep all your equipment at least 70 or 80. Right, I think now the Ukrainians have rockets which can go, I think, up to about 100. I don't remember off the top of my head, but it also means that so they cannot quickly send this to support their troops, which means that Ukrainians saying that they want to attack here. They're saying that they want to free this, but they're not saying they want to attack there. And this means that all the Russians are putting lots of troops there, but it leaves other directions open, and quite often I think Russian generals are rightly scared of Ukrainians entering here, because essentially would mean that the Russian troops in the south, even if they're not physically surrounded, they're virtually surrounded because of the bottlenecks in delivering of the equipment and delivering of the stuff they need. Essentially controlling this area might create a situation where the troops here will not have anything to fight with, and Ukrainians then will be able to essentially walk across, surround the towns and cities, and the Russians will not be able to create any serious threat all the way until Ukrainians reach this line with Crimea. Again, it comes down to the fact that it's 2 or 3 roads there which can only be used. So 2 major roads which can only be used. So you can essentially defend them. It creates a bottleneck, but it also means that, but it also creates a situation where the Russian fleet can bring in the supplies to here, right? It's kind of not easy, but they don't have to cross the bottlenecks into the mainland Ukraine, which is the bottlenecks are under threat, but on the other side, they can still have their kind of defensive line. Right, so this is how the situation is now. I've made a more than an hour long video again, which proves that I'm not made out for this. And once again, I ask all Ukrainians to go like, hey guys, do videos in English so that people can actually understand this whole thing. But if you did finish watching this one, if you lost it, and if you're not doing the videos, and you can send me some questions if you want them answered, I'll do the best, especially if these aren't the questions which have been answered in Ukraine but need to be answered in English, because I'm not perfect. But if you want the questions answered in English, I'll do my best to explain the situation. But share the video, so if this don't, then no, if there are no others. Obviously, I'm not a professional YouTuber again, so I'd be grateful if you do, but if you don't, you don't. And make sure the information gets delivered from the Ukrainian side, not from Russian trolls, not from even well-meaning Western media, because I've seen the Western media talk stuff and you go like, these guys haven't got a clue what they're talking about. They really don't understand the situation. Them talking about Ukraine is probably the same talking as me talking about, I don't know, Guadalupe. That's the name that came to my brain. I don't know why, but Guadalupe, I think it's a town in South America. I don't think it's a country, but it could be a country. I'll have to look it up. But it's like me talking about these areas. I can have some general ideas about, like, yeah, I can look it up, but I'm obviously not there on the ground. And having general ideas, which many people from Guadalupe could probably tell me, like, brother, you're talking shit. You got no idea what you're talking about, and they'll be right. And this is what I get a lot from, like, people that talk about this, even people who want to help Ukraine. You go like, brother, I understand you want to help, but you kind of a bit off, quite a bit off, or you're not understanding the local parts which matter, or you don't have that connection. You read something online, or you read something by the journalist, and then you say something, and any Ukrainian will probably start knocking his head on the fucking wall, right? So I implore Ukrainians to start doing more videos which will be answering the questions, which will explain this situation, not from the point of view of Western experts who have fucked up time after time after time after fucking time. They got so many things wrong just in the war with Russian-Ukrainian war. What was it they said? Ukraine's gonna fall in 3 days? And the Western experts were drooling over that phrase, and now 6 months later, well, they were wrong. So, and they were wrong again and again, simply because those guys have never been on the ground. They never been the boots on the ground. It's like I said, I've never been to Guadalupe. I'm pretty sure it's a nice, brilliant place with great, friendly people, but that's about as far as I can go. Right? So please share if you do, or even better, do something better than I can. Seriously. I'll try and continue with this ones, making more videos. Continue being fucking boring as hell. But just on the sake of, look, somebody needs to do it. And I'll be happy if this somebody is way better than me. Until there is someone, please share, let people know. Any questions, I'll be grateful, because then it gives me like something more of a focus points to to do and talk about and answer them, and then it will probably make it more interesting for people to listen and hear and see, and then I can maybe become a bit more of a professional YouTuber where I will actually look up things and have, instead of looking them up directly while I'm talking. So thank you all very much if you listened this far. I hope you didn't fall asleep. I hope I gave you as much information as I could. I will cover a couple of other subjects in the coming days, or maybe hours, I don't know, to let people know about some stuff which I don't see being covered in Western media. I'm not keeping the track of all of it, obviously, but I think there's a lot of misunderstanding which comes to the actions of Russians as well as Ukrainians. There's lots of misunderstanding, like, from the history point of view. So I'm going to look into this. So it's going to be a few programs. I'll try to make more programs where I will look at the military side of things with a bit more details. And like I say, there's Ukrainian, the channel, privateer station. This is a dubbed videos of the situation which is being used, but this is being done by, the situation is being covered by Ukrainian expert. He's much more fun than me. And they also cover a lot of things which I don't think are being covered in the West. And the fact that it's dubbed means you can actually listen to them. You don't have to just watch them to read the subtitles, which gives a better, again, understanding into, well, let's say Ukrainian psyche, understanding of the situation on the ground by the people, by at least one person who is on the ground. Okay, so I hope you're all doing well. I hope this war gonna finish soon and they just all gonna fuck off back to Russia and stay there. But I can't be 100% sure. So I hope you all guys have a peaceful sky over your heads. All the best. Goodbye.